أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت يا رب العباد وانتشت
A moment the dunya is
روحي.
not going to be shining at all. Now it's going to be looking bleak, and life is going to become bleak as well. And this is what makes us different from the kuffar, O servants of Allah. We're different from them. Why? Because we don't reach that stage whereby we feel we have to commit suicide. No, we always have hope. Why? Because we know that the end point is not this dunya, nor is it the grave. There is the year after. There is resurrection. There is standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah protect us all on the day of Qiyamah and shower His mercy upon us on the day of Qiyamah, and when we stand in front of Him. Ameen. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us our book of deeds in our right hands. Ameen. So a person who looks beyond the grave is a person that will sail through a difficult period, and they will never ever see that difficulty as bad. In fact, they will see that difficulty as an opportunity. And this is the reality of those productive Muslims. Even if we look at the Anbiya alayhimu salatu wasalam, how much did they suffer? How much did they go through? Subhanallah. But they never ever saw the situation as bad. They saw it as a means of earning a greater akhirah. Yes, it was difficult, but they knew that there is Jannah, there's a greater purpose, and thus we need to exercise patience. Subhanallah. So many a time a person asks, how do we develop within ourselves patience? Well, first and foremost, ensure that you develop within yourself the ability to look at life beyond the grave and not just to the grave. In that particular way and circumstance, you will be able to develop patience. So this is a very important lesson, that we should never lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead, we should turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam and Yaqub alayhi salam. Yaqub alayhi salam was subhanallah hurt. He was saddened greatly by the removal of Yusuf alayhi salam from his home, especially at a young age. Subhanallah. But it didn't make him go mental. He kept his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the lesson we learn from this particular verse, that we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in both good and difficult times. Yusuf alayhi salam as well, very productive, and had always his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, test after test, but he scored a pass after pass. So this is the reality of a believer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to be productive and inspire us to turn to Him always in both good and difficult times. And remember, O servant of Allah, we shouldn't only turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in difficult times. We should also be attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the good times. For if you are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the good times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will definitely be with you in the difficult times. For your dua, your voice, your requests will not be foreign in terms of those listening to our request, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted them the ability to listen to our requests from the creation of the skies. These angels that carry these requests through, and these angels that record our deeds, they will be used to recording our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because we always made it a practice to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the good times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also remember you in the difficult times. We also learn from this verse that prophets, even though they are free from sin, they are also in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here Musa alayhi salam is seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's assistance in delivering rainfall or water. Why? Because it was needed. So Musa alayhi salam, even though he was a prophet, he wasn't able to produce water or provide water. We also learn from this particular verse the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we've learned this in every verse, but it's extremely manifest here. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused the water to spring forth from this particular rock. And not just spring forth, but spring forth in 12 different channels. And there was a wisdom behind this, subhanAllah, because we know that Banu Israel were 12 in terms of tribes. and had only one spring set forth from this particular rock after Musa alayhi salam struck it with his stick after the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would have been chaos. People were thirsty, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy again is being made manifest here, that not only did He give them one spring, He gave them 12 springs to allow them to drink comfortably and quench their thirst. So we learn the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that He caused water to come out from a rock. And we learn, as I've just said, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon His creation in that He caused 12 springs to set forth from this particular rock. Now, subhanallah, the stick of Musa alayhi salam had several purposes. I mean, we all know from the story of Musa alayhi salam that the stick was used as a snake as well. When Musa alayhi salam was up against the magicians. And in fact, prior to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed him the ability of the snake, this stick actually being turned into a snake with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course. Also we learn here that this stick caused water to come out of a rock. We also learn that the stick, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it a means of splitting the river. Remember when Banu Israel had to cross through the river, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded Musa alayhi salam to strike the water with his stick, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused the water to split into two parts, allowing Banu Israel and Musa alayhi salam to cross. And when Fir'aun and his army entered, Musa alayhi salam struck the water again, and it subsided, and Fir'aun and his army were left to drown. So this was the miracle, or miracles rather, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted Musa alayhi salam, again teaching us the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us all and grant us the ability to comprehend the reality of our relationship and that which is regarded of us and from us as explained and taught to us in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These lessons shouldn't be lessons that we read to pass time, to collect data. As I've spoken about before, it should actually be a means of us taking heed. Wallahi, that's what it needs from us. It needs us to take heed. We are required to take heed, wallahi. Otherwise, what is the purpose, subhanallah? Just to learn. In fact, if we learn and we do not take heed, then we are liable to being punished further. Why? Because we knew and we didn't practice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. Now, let us move to verse 61. And I told you that we can't actually discuss every verse in detail as taught to us by the ulama of tafsir, be it in their books or be it in their lessons. However, we have to take parts and leave parts, but I'll try and ensure that we cover verses from particular angles as covered by the ulama of tafsir, so that at least before we end Surah Al-Baqarah, we've sort of developed a feel of how the ulama teach tafsir. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of that in verse 61. In verse 61, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, "And recall when you said, O Moses, we can never endure one kind of food. So call upon your Lord to bring forth for us from the earth its green herbs and its cucumbers and its garlic and its lentils and its onions." So Musa alayhi salam said, "Would you exchange what is better for what is easy? Go into a settlement, and indeed you will have what you have asked." And they were covered with humiliation and poverty and returned with anger from Allah upon them. That was because they repeatedly disbelieved in the signs of Allah and killed the prophets without right. That was because they disobeyed and were always transgressing. So this verse makes manifest that which we have witnessed throughout, the continuous transgression of Banu Israel. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وَإِذْ قُلْتُمْ يَا مُوسَى, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is stating, and recall when you said, O Moses, we can never endure one kind of food. Now remember, we just learned the quality of food that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving Banu Israel, al-man and as-salwa. This was high quality food, subhanallah. And they are asking for other types of foods that are considered lesser in terms of quality than al-man and as-salwa. So this is the reality of Banu Israel. They telling Musa, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ask your Rabb. And look how, subhanallah, look at the speech pattern of Banu Israel. Ask your Rabb. Was not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala their Rabb? Indeed he was. But here they're saying, ask your Rabb. يُخْرِجْ لَنَا مِمَّا تُنْبِتُ الْأَرْضِ, extract, ask your Rabb to extract for us those stuffs from the earth. And we just heard about those stuffs in the translation that I recited to you just now. So they're asking Musa alayhi salam in reality for something ridiculous. For if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving them that of higher quality and that which was not present in all of the land, then it was easy for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them from all these stuffs that they were asking for, these green pastures, these cucumbers, these onions. Why? Because this was readily available anyway. It was readily available anyway. So they are asking for something that is not even difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and indeed nothing is difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was easy for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them. So this was something ridiculous from Banu Israel. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us here that Musa said, would you exchange what is better for that which is less? Subhanallah, which person in their right mind would exchange something higher in quality, higher in grade, higher in expense and value? Who would exchange that for something lesser in value? Subhanallah. Who would do that? Right? So this was from the quality of Banu Israel. Right? So whoever does this particular thing, then they have qualities from the qualities of Banu Israel. Those people who exchange that which is greater for that which is less, they actually have qualities from the qualities of Banu Israel. Now somebody might ask, but who would actually give away something higher in value for something lesser in value? Well, have we not seen people sell their akhirah for the sake of this dunya? In their business dealings, they indulge in riba so that they can amass the dunya. And this indulgence in riba is what? It comes at the expense of one's akhirah. Is this not exchanging something higher in value for something lesser in value? Right? People who sin, people who lie, people who lie about their cost prices, for example, in business trade. This is something which is also not permissible in the Sharia. Why? They want to make a profit. So in order to ensure the completion of a sale, there might be bargaining taking place between the buyer and the seller. They lie about their cost price. Why? They want the dunya. They want to sell this particular product and earn some cash, earn some wealth, but they're doing it at the expense of their akhirah. So this falls under the category of istibdal, alladhi huwa adna billadhi huwa khair, exchanging that which is better for that which is less. So this is a very important lesson that we learn from this verse. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished them when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated, وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. Now I want you to go to the Arabic, to the Quranic Arabic verse and not the translation. So let's move to verse 61 and set our eyes where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. Remember I said that when the ulama teach us tafsir, they mention the different qira'at. The different qira'at. Now this is not something that we have been doing in the other verses, but just to give you a feel for these different qira'at, here the ulama state that وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ has been recited in the way that you can see in front of you right now, as well as وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِ مِذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِ مِذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. And it has been recited in a third way, which is وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهُمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. So the first way is as is stated in front of you, وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. In another recitation, it is recited as وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهُمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. And in yet another recitation, it is recited as وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمِ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. And all these recitations are correct. So this is something which we can equip ourselves with, and we might travel one day and hear somebody reciting it in a different manner, and when we do so, we will now understand that they are not actually making a mistake, but this is another way of actually reciting this particular verse. Obviously, the Hafs and Asim, which is the common and most popular and well-known recitation, and that is what is used even in the Mus'haf that you have in front of you. Most probably it is recited as وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humiliated them with a dhil, which is a lowness in self-esteem, and al-maskana, meaning deprived them of riches. They were rich with al-man and with salwa, as-salwa, but they asked for that which was lesser, and this kind of behavior led to their downfall, this constant behavior of theirs. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished them both in terms of themselves and punished them in terms of their wealth. So they were humiliated with poverty, and in regards to themselves they were humiliated with a low self-esteem. وَبَاءُوا بِغَضَبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that they went back to where they came from with the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon them. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states why. That is because they constantly disobeyed, and they constantly attempted to kill the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, kill the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any haqq. And this was the sunnah of Banu Israel. It is well known that many prophets were sent to them. Sometimes a prophet would come to them by day, and by afternoon that prophet would have been killed. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. Again, this is the reality of this particular qawm and this particular nation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states here that His anger was directed to them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from His anger. Ameen.